Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, headed into our next segment here. And I want to just sort of run the thought experiment of if the Dallas Mavericks win the NBA Finals, what does that mean for how we view Luka Doncic? Because as great as Kyrie Irving is, Luka really is the engine that makes this whole operation work. And again, not to take away from Kyrie at all. We've been spewing plenty of love for him throughout this postseason run, but I find it hard to imagine that if the Mavericks were to win the finals, anybody other than Luka Doncic would be the finals MVP. And it seems like in recent years, we have sort of developed a little bit of a trend in terms of this who is the best player in the NBA. And it feels like it has been very fluid, and we are always immediately trying to crown the most recent winner. And last year, Nikola Jokic had it locked up where I already thought that he was, but it became somewhat indisputable when he was the finals MVP and he put together the run that he did. But now we do come to this sort of situation here where Luka is in the conversation, and I do think that as much as I stand by Jokic, saying that Jokic was the best player in the league and that he is, but I think that I probably got a little carried away myself in terms of thinking that the gap was as big as it was, because there are other players in the conversation. I think that Luka has to be the other player in this type of a conversation where we saw these were two of the top three finalists for the MVP award. Jokic ends up bringing it home, his third MVP in the past 4 seasons. Luka Doncic ultimately finishes third behind Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as well, but I think that's more so from a team success standpoint, which I totally understand. Mavericks were a 5 seed, so I myself think that maybe I value the team success a little bit more, although it was a pretty close race in the West regardless. But for Jokic, I think you look at the year that he had where once again he was tremendous. 26 points per game, 9 assists, 12.4 rebounds. But if you want to go the sort of counting stats route, that is where Luka really sort of gets his, where he led the league in scoring this season with 34 points per game. And as much as Jokic is absolutely one of the best passers in the league, and in my opinion, the best passing big man in NBA history, you watch the passes that Luka dishes out, and it is just unbelievable. And again, he averaged 9.8 assists during the regular season as well. Neither one of them necessarily elite defensively, although like I mentioned, when Luka does want to have a little bit more of the effort, he can ramp it up some. But I think that this conversation, again, has been a little bit watered down because we do at times get sort of carried away in the moment, and that's something that I always try and account for in terms of recency bias. But the Luka legacy is already really built up. 5 All-NBA first-team selections in the first 6 years of his career, and he already has passed the likes of Dirk Nowitzki, Steph Curry. You can go on a number of different NBA greats, and Luka's already topped them in terms of All-NBA first-team selections. And I don't think that Luka has any plans of slowing down at just 25 years old. He's not somebody who really heavily relies on his athleticism. It's the craftiness, it's the skill that sort of carries his game. So we're already obviously looking at, a legend in the making, but does he have a case for taking the throne from Jokic? Again, I think that we're going to have to start with seeing them win a championship this year. Another sort of conversation piece that Van Gundy has been talking about a lot on these broadcasts is the idea that Luka and Kyrie are the best offensive backcourt in NBA history, which, from an individual skill set standpoint, I can understand the point. Now, Steph and Klay Thompson do absolutely have something to say in terms of that, and I don't necessarily want to dive into all of those lists just yet, but it's definitely a conversation in terms of individual ability to create shots for themselves and others and close out games. Two of the best closers of their respective generations. I don't know whether or not you would want to consider Kyrie and Luka the same generation or not, but regardless, two players that can absolutely elevate this Mavericks team. Now, it's going to be interesting, I think, to see how they are able to manage the Celtics defense because, I think that the Celtics have just as good of point of attack defenders as anybody does in the NBA, with Derek White, Drew Holiday, obviously as the backcourt, but I would probably expect it to be Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum that are getting a lot of the Luka assignments if that were to be the finals matchup. Now, obviously, we don't know what the injury update is yet with Kristaps Porzingis. I don't think that he's going to be playing tonight. The idea was that he could be available for Game 4, but at this point, up 3-0, do they even necessarily want to risk that? I mean, if he got in and played 10 or so minutes, I don't think that would be a bad thing by any means, but you definitely don't want to force it either. And that being said, I think that as much as Al Horford, who we're going to be getting to shortly in the big Celtics win from Saturday night, but he has been involved in, it feels like, just about every defensive play, especially during that Cleveland series and early on against Indiana, where other teams are trying to take advantage of him as much as possible defensively, and we've seen the way that Luka and Kyrie have been operating this pick and roll throughout the Timberwolves series and how many problems it's given even an all-world defender in Rudy Gobert. So in terms of Al Horford, how is he necessarily going to be handling that? But again, just sort of to wrap up this conversation around Luka in particular, again, I think that it's probably going to take, another year or so of Luka maintaining this. I know that, again, he's been great since the minute that he stepped into the NBA, but in terms of the idea of his game being able to be a championship applicable style of play, which has been a question of the past in sort of the isolation and extremely high usage rates. I mentioned the comparison in the first segment to James Harden. I think that you can definitely make the similarities between the two players in terms of how they choose to operate in offense, but including, I feel like we throw the term maturity around a lot on this podcast, and there is definitely a more team-centric focus that we've seen from Luka over the course of this postseason, being able to understand that he has somebody else that he trusts in Kyrie Irving. I still struggle to say he is completely mature because the arguing with the refs is still absolutely a very prominent thing with him, and it drives me a little bit crazy just watching it. But at the same time, there is no denying the talent level with Luka whatsoever, and he is going to be in that conversation of being the best player in the world headed into next season. Now, I'm not willing to take the crown away from Jokic just yet. Like I mentioned, won 3 of the last 4 MVP awards and has also won a finals in the past 2 years. And obviously it goes beyond, just sort of those individual accolades. If you actually watch the games and see the way that Jokic impacts everything, I still stand by it, but one key difference I feel like is the fact that Luka is a guard. He has a 3-point shot to his game, so being able to be a primary ball handler like that, and again, it's not that Jokic can't be a ball handler, but that archetype of being a, hands-on perimeter player does lead to more successful crunch time offense, I think, and that's where we're seeing Luka really define himself in this postseason, is coming up when the moments call for it, and he's been incredible there. But let me know how you all feel in the comments section. Again, this is completely subjective, but absolutely it's going to be one of the biggest storylines headed into the NBA Finals. If he can steal this crown, the whole, face of the league idea, It is kind of ironic now. This isn't my own original thought. I saw it on Twitter at some point, but the fact that we, as an NBA media, sort of seemed like we were. I myself wasn't really a part of it quite as intensely as others, but the media was trying to crown Anthony Edwards as, this up-and-coming next face of the league, everything like that. And we are likely going to see a Luka Doncic versus Jason Tatum NBA Finals, where these have been the two up-and-comers for years. And I know that, the newest thing is always the hottest thing, but they are both extremely reliable. So we're going to be diving into Jason Tatum and his postseason performance on the other side of the break, because I think he played one of his best games of his career in the Game 3 comeback against the Indiana Pacers. So stick with us. We are going to be right back after this quick break, and we will dive into that Game 3 matchup.